To discuss this issue of the safety of doctors, nurses, and healthcare staff, we have with us a very eminent panel. Please welcome Dr. Nimesh G. Desai, Director, Institute of Human Behavior and Allied Science, Dr. Sanjeev Kumar, he's the chair of Indian Academy of Public Health, Dr. Sachin Bajaj, founder and director, Ujala Cignus Hospital, and Professor Debashish Danda. He's founder, Clinical Immunology and Rheumatology, CMC Vellore, and President-elect Asia Pacific League of Associations for Rheumatology. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us and being with us on this very important discussion that we are having. And this is, of course, about the safety of our frontline workers, our heroes, our medical staff. Now, the good thing is that the government has now passed an ordinance making this a punishable offense. Should you hurt a doctor or a nurse at the line of duty, you could face penalties, even jail term. Now, let me start with you, Dr. Danda. What do you feel? Why have we come here? Why does a law need to be passed? And just because there's a law, will we not have any violence?
If you permit me, before I go into the physical assaults on the doctors issue, I would like to broadly outline the challenges and hazards which doctors every day, day in, day out come across, and what are the root causes for that. Only if you do that, we can address this. So please permit me to speak.
Yes, sir. Please tell us.
Yes. So I must tell you one thing. In 1980s, India has passed laws which has made health as a purchasable commodity. When we are medical students, we read in community medicine very clearly, boldly underlined statement, health is not a purchasable commodity. Health is a basic human right. So the moment you have done that, you have done the damage, because it is like buying sugar or buying gold, buying health. So this gives opportunity for the divide between the rich and the poor. And that is the root cause of today's all the troubles. I will enlist you all the common causes, common hazards which we come across every day in medical practice. Before the physical assaults, there are many other hazards we come across. The most important of all is the biological hazards. Even now, even with PPEs, a lot of doctors are getting infected, and more than 50 doctors have already died. But it is not only the COVID, even with HIV, even TB, there are doctors who got infected and died. Even today, doctors get TB and they die. Also, lifestyle diseases, the Indian doctors have the lower mortality than normal, lower lifespan than the normal population. Because of the lifestyle of the doctors is mostly seeing long hours of patients, lack of exercise, unhealthy food, all those things are also contributing to doctors' poor health. So this is a professional hazard. Number two is the stress-related hazards. The professional stress for doctors is too high. The workload beyond the human capacity, the workplace which is not the ideal. Sometimes the pressure from the political or the VIPs, if you have a rich patient or a well-off or a highly connected patient, it takes your attention to that patient and affects the care of other patients, and that's a stress to the doctors. Also, you have the peer-related pressures. Sometimes there's a professional jealousy and other things. Social pressures, the doctors are expected much more than human beings can do. The academic pressure, those in the academic world, they are under pressure for publication. There is a word called publish or perish. If you don't publish, if you perish, and that leads to a lot of pressure. Family hazards. The most doctors in India are able to spend very little quality time with their family members. Many doctors' children are not able to do well because the parents have not paid enough attention to their children, and their families are also broken. There are a lot of divorces among doctors, especially those who work day in, day out in the operation theaters or fully dedicated to hospitals and don't have time for their families. There is also you have legal harassment. You know, the moment the rules came, doctors can be easily framed into a criminal charge. You know, what is a criminal charge is basically when you deliberately attack or kill someone. Suppose a doctor takes an injection and says, I'm going to kill you, Anisha, I'm injecting you a lethal injection. That is criminal charge. But if there is a medical error or if there is a side effect of medicine, that should not charge a doctor with criminal charges like thieves and dacoits. And that is a terrible thing which has happened to Indian healthcare system. And then comes the worst things, the physical assaults. You will notice for the last 15 years, there have been so high risk of physical assaults. I had heard from a legal expert from Mumbai in a meeting. He has said there's a 1 in 10 doctor has a chance of getting either criminally charged or physically assaulted. So these are the things which has happened. Why is it happening? What are the causes? Unless we address this, we cannot sort this. The first, it needs a detailed investigation by independent bodies. But I have some thoughts about it. The one is, I must say always, it is professional jealousy. Often, it is the doctors who go against the doctors. And that is a very unfortunate part because of some disagreement, some prestige issues. So when I was in Australia for 3 years, my boss said always, look at the first page of the patient's record. Is he belonging to a doctor's family or doctor's relative, or is he related to a lawyer? First see those things before you start addressing the patient. And I think that's very important. The professional jealousy is something doctors must be careful about because everybody's plate is full in India. There is no shortage of patients or opportunity. Number two is the harassment to take revenge. For example, doctors under stressful conditions in busy outpatients or wards, sometimes what they do is might have used a loose word or got angry or used a harsh word against a patient relative. And this sometimes provokes the patient relatives and gives rise to the revengeful act in the form of either a charge or physical assault. There are also money-making quarters. There are many money-making quarters who are irrational or unscientific, and there is a mushrooming growth of what I call is a God industry, who misuse in the name of God and treat patient in the pretext of many things, and they cause a lot of harm, and they feel sort of challenged by the scientific or modern medicine. So that is one. There are also goons which are provoked by vested interests to humiliate doctors. There are legal loopholes which I have mentioned to you, which can be easily used to frame doctors. The poor conditions of a healthcare delivery system. You will see that many government hospitals are just unlivable. You cannot just stay there even for an hour. The unhygienic condition, the poor work culture, the poor infrastructure. I think people can die there in the hospitals more. There's a chance of dying there more often than at home. So this is another poor condition of our infrastructure. Then the poor public awareness with misguidance and misinformation. You know, the internet and the social media are spreading more of non-science and misinformations and myths in people's mind, that the truth gets diluted by this and people get misguided every day, day in, day out. The people do not know what is truth and what is not. The next is the unrealistic expectation with the patients from doctors. Doctors are not gods. Doctors are human beings. Doctors can do mistakes. If you pressurize them and push them to the wall, they cannot deliver the best. So that is something you have to realize. And our poor quality of education from school till university and medical school. Half the medical colleges, schools today are corporate or the capitation fee based medical colleges, and the best may not always come in. So that is another issue.
That is true, Dr. Danda. You've raised a lot of important points. In fact, I have friends who have been overjoyed, saying that, you know, a friend of mine, her mother was a gynecologist, and she would say, wow, I'm so happy my mama is going to take some time out for my birthday, because she doesn't have time otherwise. She's always so busy.
Yes.
That I'm feeling so blessed that my mom is going to be with me when I cut a cake. So, it is true the lives of doctors is very tough. Now, I want to come to Dr. Sachin Bajaj. Dr. Bajaj, we've heard Dr. Danda outline so many workplace hazards, so many issues that the doctors face on a daily basis. Now, after hearing him, I just wonder, why would anyone want to be a doctor? In older days, people used to say it's noble. There's nothing more noble than being a doctor. People used to say, after God, there is doctor on earth. But things are changing so fast. And what do you think goes in the minds of youngsters when they think about the medical profession? Is it now seen as a lucrative, profession, so people want to get in, or people still look at it as a noble profession where people can do good for the society? And what is the real reality actually?
Thank you, Nisha, for raising this. It's a very important point. So, see, you cannot get into the profession of medicines just looking it as a profession. There has to be something else in your mind when you're getting into this profession. And I tell anybody who's aspiring to become a doctor this exact same thing. That if you're looking to get into this profession for the money or for career security, something like that, you should definitely not think of getting into this profession unless and until you are willing to put in long, hard days without much reward. You're willing to put in many, many years of effort. And of course, if you are successful, if you are good at your profession, money will automatically follow. And we should not grudge these doctors that the doctors who work long hard hours. It takes 15, 20 years to really achieve super specialist perfection that doctors like Danda have. You need to work very, very hard for your degrees, your basic degrees, then your specialty, then your super specialty, then you do your senior residency, then you do your lecturership. Only after that do you achieve enough perfection in doing that one surgery that only maybe 10 people in the country can do. So if after that you do earn money, we should not grudge you that. But before that, if you feel that if I've done my MBBS and now I spent a crore of rupees on my MBBS, so I should start earning money now. If you follow that route, that is sure shot failure, and that is the reason many of the doctors will suffer from the problem of mistrust from the community, the backlash from the community that we see. So uh, like I did, I mean, I was pursuing my super specialization in a very big top hospital of Delhi, but then I felt that there was a need that was unfulfilled in the small towns of North India. People had to travel 5, 6 hours to get to Delhi to take healthcare, which should have been provided to them in the golden hour. People were dying on the roads because they could not access a cardiologist in their small town and they had to travel to Delhi. So we went to these small towns, opened 12 of these hospitals working in the small towns. We have cardiologists, neurosurgeons, intensive care in these small towns. That means that we have to work at very, very cut. I mean, borderline margins. We don't earn any money out of it. It's a daily struggle to meet our ends. But if we were just thinking that we'll earn money out of it, we would have shut these centers and come back to Delhi and started working here. But there is something else: the joy of saving lives, the joy of seeing patients when they are getting well, the joy of Ayushman patients coming to us, and the ministers and the prime minister recognizing us that we are the biggest provider of Ayushman healthcare all over the country as an organization. So when you find joy in these things rather than just the money, I think medicine is a profession that will work very well for you. So right now, I requested you to put me in early because I am here as a volunteer for the plasma bank inauguration that the Delhi government is doing. Suppose there's no money in talking to COVID patients, in volunteering for them, and running helplines for them, and even trying to get a plasma bank set up and getting in donors here. So I'm here for the plasma bank inauguration. Of course, there is just the joy that comes in that says that okay, maybe we'll do something that will run this, that will end this mad scramble run for plasma that is happening in Delhi right now. So if you find joy in these things, medicine is just the right profession for you. But if you don't and you find joy in money and foreign vacations and big cars, then maybe you should, think of other options which are much easier to do and you can reach them much quicker. You're on mute, Anisha.
This is amazing that you are helping with the plasma bank. It's really a very important thing in Delhi right now. There are so many patients who require it, and now asking their friends, family, social media, please get connect us to a plasma donor. Thank you so much for putting
Yeah,
in your
maybe I can
initiative
go
here.
up. I'm just going up to the plasma bank now, so maybe I can share some visuals to you directly from there. I won't be able to say much, but I can show you what's happening.
That would be great. This is really a great initiative, and we have seen a lot of patients recover from the plasma therapy. We've even seen Delhi Health Minister Satyendra Jain recover. So it is really a treatment with so much promise at a time when everybody is so worried about the pandemic. Uh, Professor Kumar, I want to ask you, there is fear, patients have fear, patients have hopes, patients have expectations. All of this sometimes make a very heady dish, and very unfortunately sometimes doctors are at the receiving end. Can something be changed so that these expectations, fears can be managed better? Now, I'm sure our medical education in our country is superb. There are doctors in our country who perform surgeries which people from outside our country come and get it done here because they're excellent, their expertise is unparalleled. Now, this must be coming to an extent because of the quality of education given in our country. Here, can we also have something about managing patient expectations, about better communications? If that perhaps is handled, perhaps we don't go into an area where somebody is provoked, somebody is driven to violence, or somebody just felt that it's not going to happen. And what have you told me? You led me on. Do we need to do that as well?
So, Anisha, thank you. And it was a pleasure to listen to Dr. Debashish Danda, renowned immunologist and rheumatologist. And I'm glad he took time off from his busy schedule to talk to the audience. And I also learned a lot of things from him. And then Dr. Bajaj on the forefront of fighting, and he was mentioning going to plasma bank immediately after his talk was over. Let's look at the whole ecosystem, Anisha. I will maybe cover it under 4 points. One is the safety. Infection control measures, routinely, COVID or no COVID, have to be the best in any medical setup. Unfortunately, in India, studies have shown that out of 100, 11 to 40, the range, different setup have different range. People can get infected in hospital and they may die of conditions they did not come with. They acquired these conditions in the hospital. Lot of effort is going on. We have accreditation bodies. We also have Government of India promoting quality assurance under an initiative of the ministry. So we have here, COVID or no COVID, we have to have a very good infection control measure in place at every place within a hospital. When you have calamities like COVID, when they strike, it will be very easy for you to top it up with additional measures like use of personal protective equipment and so on. But the basic infection control measures are a must in every setup, not only for patients but also for doctors. As Dr. Danda pointed out, today doctors are in news because many of them unfortunately made a supreme sacrifice, lost their lives. But there were doctors and healthcare workers who were dying earlier of other conditions in the hospital. So it's not only the patients who suffer, the doctors and the healthcare providers are at risk. And then you hear stories. If a hospital insists that before I take you up for surgery, I will test you for COVID. And then it becomes a big news. You cannot do it. Court says you can't do it. And in the court, in any litigation, they won't let anybody enter unless the person is tested for COVID. What is this? Court doesn't want to listen or admit a plea if a litigant is not COVID tested. And on the other hand, they take action against doctors who insist, because we unfortunately lost a very renowned anesthetist in number one COVID hospital in Delhi. But
those are sheer double standards.
This is double standards. You know, doctors, healthcare providers, they need to be treated. We can't tell them God, but they need to be treated as the people who need to be protected at every level. Then care of hospital staff. If some staff member tests positive or has some mild symptoms, we have been hearing stories through media. People like you have been highlighting that no, continue on duty. You cannot take rest. You cannot quarantine. You know, this is not acceptable. They are the one sending people on quarantine whom they care for. But when they themselves have some of these problems, the restrictions are imposed on them. So that's the first point on safety for doctors and also for patients. Second point I want to mention is motivation. On motivation, pay and allowances. Today, in the newspaper, 2 government hospitals run by Delhi government, their doctors and staff has not received salaries for last 2 to 3 months. You are raising money to open big hospital, converting religious places into the largest COVID care center in the world, and you don't have money to pay to the doctor. They have families to run, they have rents to pay for the house, they have school fees to be paid. This is, I would call it, criminal. You have one of the best doctors in the world. I'm glad you mentioned that in your introduction. And at the same time, you're not ready to pay them on time. This is, and then pay and allowances for doctors have to be commensurate with the best in the countries, and they should be paid equal to, if not higher than, class 1 services. We have gradually reduced the payment to the doctors when you compare it with the bureaucrats in the country. Appointment, promotions, transfer, these are some of the aspects which need to be done. A bureaucrat, class 1 services, gets an order of his promotion well in advance from the date of promotion. That doesn't happen to doctors, and that affects their motivation, that affects their morale. We have the same system being followed for one privileged class of government employees. Why can't that be applied to the doctors who are doing the best work? Workload. And every day you hear beds added, new ward created. But what about people? There are same number of doctors, there are same number of healthcare providers. You are not adding. This time they should have walk-in interview. For doctor, you come, I'll give you regular appointment, not contractual. I looked at Delhi government in July 2018. 1400, this does not include doctors, exact number is 1281 posts were advertised for staff to work in hospital. It's been more than 2 years. Why these positions have not been filled up? And they're finding ways. Nobody will take people on contractual assignment. They don't get regular jobs. You have regular jobs which are vacant. This system needs to be looked into and addressed as a high priority. Call them worry, but at the same time, don't pay them for what services they have been rendering. This is another aspect which adversely impacts the motivation. Then the disrespect. You often hear people even up to chief minister level on the media coming on Doordarshan saying, "Oh, I will take action. I will take your license. I will de-recognize a private hospital. I will take the degree of the doctor if you don't do this." Suddenly overnight he is posted to another place. If you don't go there, your degree will be taken. One doctor was terminated because he raised issues in a government hospital of the personal protective equipment not being provided. He was terminated. There was a lot of noise, people like you in the media, and finally that person was taken back. But I am sure the discrimination against that person will continue, and rest of the doctors will get disappointed. Then you have laws. The medical care came under Consumer Protection Act.
Yes.
And when you work under constraint, and then at the same time you are always worried about legal action. Dr. Danda talked about it, how other countries also have this problem. So we have to take care of this. The last point I want to raise is accountability. If a hospital has vacancies which have not been filled up for years, who is accountable? not probably the medical superintendent, because appointment is made centrally. Yes, there's some hospital, especially the private one, it is done locally, but in government hospital, accountability has to be fixed at whatever level, be it political level, be it bureaucrat level. They are never held accountable. So we have to have an appropriate level accountability put in place. If government doesn't allocate required funds to healthcare, 2002 health policy had put the target that 2% of GDP will be spent on health.
Healthcare.
It came to 2017 when I was heading a government institution that was assigned the task of preparing 2017 health policy. It had barely moved up to 1.1%. Nobody accountable. Why did the health sector not receive the money? Yes, you don't have government hospital. Then you tie up with private hospital, provide free care to the people. You have not reached the target of expenditure. Healthcare should be, as Dr. Danda said, human right. And responsibility for that right is government.
And there has to be accountability. The buck has to stop with someone.
And I worked closely in the government for 3 years. Ministry of Health asks for funding for the budget. It gets cut down. Who is accountable? Either finance minister or prime minister's office. And that is the level when accountability is fixed for low expenditure on health. We have to go to higher level. It needs to be clearly laid down. Nobody wants to be accountable. Who will be terminated? Maybe a medical superintendent, maybe a doctor, head of the department. And when it is in the field, the poor A&M will be terminated because she was not trained. She didn't get the syringes. She vaccinated children with measles and children had complications. She will be the one terminated and everything will be quiet. So accountability is very important in
the medical profession. Definitely,
absolutely true. Like COVID. So that's all I have to say on this.
You're absolutely right, and we'll discuss these issues further. You know, we are going to be in this pressure situation for a very long time. How do we make up for this gap? There are not so many doctors because there are not so many colleges. Doctors are falling sick when they're contracting this disease. Some have passed away. So this situation is not getting better. What can be done? You spoke about the unhygienic conditions of hospitals themselves, and that is a threat to doctors who stay there for us, patients as well. Now, the Modi government started with the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan to get the sensitivity about cleanliness going for everyone so that it percolates everywhere. But all this takes time. And now, unfortunately, we are running out of time. We have a pandemic. We have existing diseases which also have to be treated. Dr. Kumar mentioned that once you go to a court, before you go to a court you'll be asked, have you tested? Because you cannot treat people unless they get the corona testing so that everybody is safe. So there is a big demand mismatch. How is this going to get bridged? What can we do? We want to say thank you to our doctors. We've beaten thalis, we've done all of that. But what more can we do as citizenry to ensure that in this time when we're going to feel this demand supply gap, there is less a mistake on our part?
So we have got on the right point, Ms. Anisha. This is what I'm going to, if you allow me, I will explain this in a broad perspective of the societal view of medicine in our country. There are two important aspects which matters in delivery of a good healthcare system. The number one is the basic education, how we grow our children from school to transition into a medical college. I will explain that with little detail. And number two, what are our healthcare priorities by the nation? I think first I will address the healthcare priorities, then I will go to the education system, which makes our healthcare defective. Number one is, if you see countries who made good healthcare delivery, even poorer countries than us like Cuba or even Vietnam, public in primary healthcare, family medicine, general practice, and public health. These are the number one specialties. I was mentioning in another discussion yesterday, I was there in Australia for 3 years. The GP training there is the longest. longest among all specialties. It's 5 years after their medical graduation. And they turn out to be the most effective healthcare providers. By the time a patient comes to a specialist, the GP has managed it perfectly in an evidence-based manner, and it is just referred for the next step. So we got our priorities wrong. There is almost non-existent family medicine in our country. The GP is self-styled in India. There's no training of GP in India. And these are the branches should be number one priorities by the government before we venture into higher specialties and other things. All should go on side by side, but our priority should be that. That is number one. So once you do that, number two, we need to have a huge number of public volunteers. You know, when the normal people from the society participate in healthcare, it's like you have those healthcare workers who work in the Anganwadi and other areas. Those are the kind of people in Kerala. How did they contain Nipah? How did they contain Corona so well? Because of they had lakhs of volunteers who came forward to help the government in different aspects of healthcare delivery system. These are the strengths. Doctors alone cannot do it. Doctor is a highly specialized person who looks after the medical aspect. But there are so many other allied issues of healthcare which are ignored if we don't have enough volunteers to take part actively, to educate, to run the support system. This is about the healthcare delivery system. I must say government should prioritize. Number two is our education. What is the way today children become doctors? It is often by the parents telling their children to become doctors, and that is not the way the aptitude is tested. Today, if you get 90%, you are average. If you get 90 to 95% school, you are just above average. And between 95 and 99%, you may be good. And 99 and 100% is only excellent. So even people with 95% above marks sometimes do not get into branches where they want to study. And this is not unusual. You see top colleges reject people with 90% marks. So our system of education is degree oriented. It is not educating people how education should be. Now coming to medical education in our country has been completely, it is too much of degree oriented, too compressed, too many things. You know, I must tell you, 4.5 years is too short a period for someone to grasp basics of medicine. And it is too short, I must tell you. It takes 10 years to make an MD, which is the basic degree in America. And after BSc, we get school children after 18 years age, 17 years age, join medical school. They're pretty immature. And you have, look at in Australia, they have 6 to 7 years of medicine and they have 2 years of internship. India should have a longer, proper, comprehensive, holistic medical education where they look after the training, look after the trainees to grow into human beings, sensitive human beings, holistic carers. They should have ethical values, they should have an understanding of public health, and they should not be just sitting in the medical colleges and just doing that. You know, that Australia medical students are posted in GP's clinic. Can you believe that? Because in hospitals, you don't see cough, cold, or common diarrhea, dysentery. They come to the GPs. So they are posted there to learn there. So we have to have really revamp of our medical education system to make our doctors competent. Moreover, the bond period after MBBS for 2 years in a rural setup. CMC Vellore has an excellent system. The 2-year bond is there for many years, and they all during this period are posted in the peripheral mission hospitals. And then they come every 3 to 6 months for a short period of 2 weeks in the medical college in CMC to update themselves. And at the end of 2 years, they get a diploma in family medicine. So what I'm trying to say that you should not waste every time. You can have medical course like, you know, anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, the first 1 year of MBBS. Yes. You know, each of these portions can become a full-fledged BSc course. It is too much. It is just inhuman to tax children to study those in 1 year time. I must tell you that India should also adopt the system of joining medicine only after BSc, and that BSc can be in these preclinical branches. Then, when you go into the medical school, there should be modules, and each module should give a certification. Like you have 1 year on medical ethics, public health, and sociological aspects, economy of health, all those things. They should have 1 year basic before they start seeing patients, and that should give them a certification or a fellowship. After that, you have 2 years of paraclinical subject like pathology, microbiology, pharmacology. They learn along with bedside seeing patients, and they learn to apply them in real life. And that becomes a 2 year, you have, they call it a fellowship.
Right, Dr. Danda, what you're talking about is a huge revamp. It's a huge mindset change. It's something that will again take a very long time. Dr. Kumar wanted to add something to this question. Dr. Kumar, please go ahead. What did you make of what Dr. Danda said? Very, very interesting ideas, but we're not even getting doctors. I mean, we should prepare others to perhaps chip in. What do you feel?
What Dr. Danda said is very right, and I'm glad the medical council, the current incarnation, is looking at some of those issues. What I wanted to raise for you and audience is some of the soft skills are missing in our medical curriculum. When I was an intern, the first death I faced, I didn't know how to face the family. This patient, I still remember his name, and the whole picture comes back to my life. Not other patients. The patient has just died, and we normally put a curtain when you're reviving the patient. All my effort fails. My senior came on a sign of stop cardiac pulmonary resuscitation. The patient is gone. I was on the verge of crying myself, and when I came out, I had to declare it to the family. I didn't know. And mind you, I was trained in All India Institute of Medical Sciences. So some of these soft skills, communication, and the violence against doctors, one factor is there is inadequate communication between doctor, patient, and the families. We are not trained. We are not trained on listening skills. Before violence starts, you can read it, that it is coming. If you are trained to look at non-verbal communication, you don't know how to deal with it. The doctors become, because they are the ones who are the authority in a hospital, they become arrogant, and the way they treat the patient precipitates violence. I wouldn't say every situation, but that is one factor. So some of these soft skills must be included in undergraduate curriculum, how to communicate with the patient, how to communicate with the family. Even if you are busy, you have to do this. The second aspect is you mentioned in your question about how do you move to the ideal world, and Dr. about it. First, let's look at what has been planned in the country 20-25 years back. Have we got there? No. Then we can look at going. I'll give you just figures. I looked at the data recently. You have 6 beds in every primary health center. There is 1 medical officer. If you multiply, we have about 26,000 primary health centers in the country. Multiply 26,000, you have 160,000 beds available. And as Dr. Danda said earlier, now the COVID infection has gone to the rural area. You will need these beds. But these beds are not functional. 20% of them don't have doctors. Only 1 doctor is required, is not there. You go to the next level, that is community health center. Each community health center is supposed to have 7 doctors, 4 specialists, and 30 beds. 30 into, you have about 6,000 of them, 180,000 beds. You have 350,000 beds only on paper. You look at the vacancies. Number 1 vacancies are for surgeons and physicians. You need physicians in COVID outbreak. 80% of the post of the specialist physicians are vacant in CHC. You already have this infrastructure, but as I said earlier, who's accountable? People. They are the ones who should be taken to task.
Taken to task, yes.
And all these first, then you got Danda was talking about it. How can we move to a situation where we can compare and be proud of? No, Indian system is as good as any developed country. So that's next stage. But we haven't got to what we had planned 20, 25 years back.
Dr. Desai,
Hi.
Hi. You
Sorry,
heard.
all because of me. I'm now at my desk. But can I ask? Sorry, Anisha. Nice to talk to you. Do we have any other participants other than the 10 that I see in the list?
We have with us Dr. Danda, Dr.
No, I see the list. Yeah, I saw that list. Do we have any other participants, or are we having a small group discussion? I just thought...
We are having at this point of time a small group discussion with four of you. So
Sure.
Dr. Danda and Dr. Kumar have now highlighted for us, Dr. Danda, how an effective system works in Australia. Dr. Kumar saying that whatever we plan for, we are underachieving. But whenever we get there, however we get there, we cannot be trampling upon the people we need. We cannot have violence, and we cannot have our doctors not safe. We cannot say you just forget about having PPE or having the equipment required. You can't do this. You'll never get there then. If people are falling by the wayside, how will you ever reach a target? So in your experience, have you seen severe negligence where the minimum is not provided for, or violence against doctors which is completely uncalled for? Have you seen this, Dr. Desai?
Yes. I was asking you about the size of the group so that we can have a candid discussion. I mean, if you are trying to educate a larger mass, then the approach would be slightly different. From what you're saying, Anisha, there are 2 or 3 things that occur to me. One is I am with you in what you said in last few sentences, and that's if I understood you correctly. In healthcare, like in almost any other field, but certainly in healthcare, for the consumers as well as for the providers, there should be some non-negotiables. And some of the non-negotiables in the current crisis or in the recent past would be the safety against infection for providers, safety against physical violence against healthcare providers, adequate or at least optimal salary paid regularly, as Dr. Sanjeev Kumar was highlighting some unfortunate parts, and a few others. So surely there should be, and there are some non-negotiables. Like I said, I'm an optimist, I'm a meliorist. So I tend to see the positives, and I still look at the future more positively than some of us might. This aspect of there being some non-negotiables, I think this country and this society are beginning to realize and accept and implement. The condition of the medical college is and civil hospitals in the 60s or 70s or 80s was actually much more pathetic. The entire idea of quality assurance that Dr. Sanjeev Kumar heads one moment of, and like I said, we have been a party too. I do want to see, and I do see the fact that quality assurance is catching up. Like almost everything else, that's also catching up at a very slow pace, possibly when you consider the larger scenario, and at a fairly erratic manner.
Fashion, okay.
It is not uniform. It is not quick enough. But then, can I also come to the flip side of it? And I thought, in a small group discussion, we can kind of push the envelope. In general, for the society's coping, for the so-called and correctly acclaimed huge clinical acumen of the Indian doctors, and if I might add the third dimension, if you'll all permit, my teams and I have had huge experience in disaster and conflict situations. And we also work with the NDMA closely. If there is one aspect that's emerging about disasters or conflicts, or by now one would say epidemics, and the mental health scenario or the psychosocial sequelae, it is the individual resilience the family support, and the social coping mechanisms, proving the mental health scenario for the South Asia and Afro-Asia countries to be much better than the West.
Okay.
I also think that the much maligned lack of hygiene in this country and the habits that we have all had, Golgappas at the street corner, beginning from there, is actually providing a much better immunity now. The recovery rates, I dare say. So I'm posing a problem, friends. Please understand. Like I started this part, in the 21st century, as we get modernized and professionalized as a human race, there will have to be some non-negotiables, surely. But at the same time, sadly enough, our strength seems to come from our weaknesses in a number of ways. Take my word for it for now. PTSD, the much celebrated PTSD, doesn't happen in this country, my friends. We followed up 35,000 population in Bhuj and Kutch for 8 to 9 years, starting within the first 1 month of the earthquake. No PTSD. The post-traumatic other mental health disorders, very minimal. Recently, we have had an occasion, would you believe, allow me to share this as a mental health person. The Supreme Court directed many states, and we kind of took it very seriously. In the last 8 to 10 weeks, our teams have fanned out to all parts of Delhi in those temporary shelter homes where we saw all the scenes on television screens. And believe you me, the psychiatric morbidity, even the psychological distress or the psychological discomfort, and we studied about, I think, 50,000 people, 53,000 in fact. The psychiatric disorder and the psychological distress is no more than the general population. Now, here is my question to myself, and I've been recently putting it up in webinars. Here is a group of people, not only in Delhi, but all over the country, who were possibly at the lowest rung of the society. They anyway did not have much to go for in their life, right? They were merely earning their minimal wage and bread through hard labor. They were living in very difficult circumstances. Background. They went through this tremendous anxiety of their life, livelihood, their safety. And so they did the impulsive act of coming out on the expressways. The courts and the government did, I think, what was optimal, not the best, in giving them temporary shelter homes, giving them food, giving them a sense of safety. And their mental health and their coping was very good.
Mm-hmm.
How do these people achieve this? So there are those inherent strengths of the human race, human adaptation, and particularly of Afro-Asian continent and the South Asian Indian context, that we should not be losing. See, if you are going to become as modern as the Europe and US, the next epidemic, actually, we may not have all these strengths.
No, that is fair from the patient angle.
How do we handle this? How do we handle this? Yeah.
I want to understand from the supplier side, from the doctor side, because as Dr. Danda has pointed out, as Dr. Kumar has pointed out, historically, our investment in our healthcare system it has been really remarkably poor. We as patients may have had better coping systems, but for an epidemic, we need a trained manpower, and we haven't had it because the investment hasn't been made. On top of that, you have your frustrations coming out on the doctors. You don't let them into a society because they may be exposed to COVID. You're beating them up. So, you are saying that general population copes with many anxieties well. But what about our doctors? If a portion of that society is not able to cope well, should they vent it out on the doctor?
No, of course not. No, of course not. Totally with you. But allow me to share another dilemma. I'm really taking this in a small group discussion as my opportunity. We all need ventilation, including myself. Okay. So the thing is, or does have senior doctors or Anisha Abadao, in April, we started a telecounseling service on our own from IBAS with Delhi Medical Council, Delhi Medical Association, approved by Delhi government, specialized telecounseling service for healthcare workers. Okay. I got 12 and potentially another 12 senior most psychiatrists, private and government doctors in Delhi offer 2 hours slots of free counseling for any doctor or healthcare professional who might be distressed and who might get support. Okay. Believe you me, in the month of April, we had 4 calls.
Dr. Desai, that isn't because they don't take their stress, seriously. It's because they don't have the time. Look at our doctors.
Allow me. Anisha, I'm not holding the opposite out. I'm only putting forth real remarks. Now, of course, recently Amit Shah visited Lok Nayak Hospital and advised the psychosocial counseling we provided. So the Delhi government came to us and said, okay, we named this very nicely. I thought Samarthan. We tried popularizing the word across government and private sector. My dilemma is, and genuinely partly as mental health professional, as public health professional for our society, I don't think there can be any intuitive disagreement. I don't think there can be any disagreement about intuitive agreement that doctors and nurses are under stress.
Okay.
Sure. None of us would intuitively disagree. And there is enough evidence, at least indirect. How and why is it that somehow when you offer concrete help,
nobody takes it up?
Yes. After the government of the highlighted it, we have had 7 more calls. So there are a lot of imponderables that we need to, I think, recognize. But to, I think, come back to what you were pinning me down for, and I'm happy to be pinned down. Like I said, at IBAS, we have made sure, no question of lack of BP, no question of any lack of support. Somebody is unwell, please go and leave, stay at home. Okay. We are a mental health institution, neuropsychiatric institution. We are a non-COVID hospital. But please be with me for a minute. We get these homeless mentally ill people from the street. And I've since February been worried about the COVID infection through homeless people. And believe me, we have had 10 COVID positive patients in neuropsychiatry. Not tested sometimes for a week or 2 weeks because the ICMR testing protocol does not permit homeless people to be tested. Because of which we have had 40 staff members who tested positive, including our senior residents in psychiatry and neurology. So we have had our share of handling the staff reactions. And it's not been easy. But I do think that, and genuinely, I mean, pardon me if I'm in a huge minority of even one here, I do think that in crisis situations, systems do as best as they can. And I think regardless of center, state, Bengal, Delhi, Maharashtra, national government, I think our governments have done at a cross section at least more than optimal. It may not be the best. There are always redressal mechanisms from the courts of law to public domains to, I think we have done all right. And I'm not being diplomatic. I think as a nation and as a society, we have done all right. Even the lockdown and the behavior of people, I mean, there will always be instances of very responsible behavior where somebody organizes a wedding party and gets to 50 people. Given all the constraints and difficulties, we have done all right. We can always keep pushing the envelope, asking for more. I would like to see it positively still.
Okay.
There are huge pockets of negativity, I agree.
Okay, that's definitely. Yeah. Dr. Dana, you did talk about how we need more GPs, and if we have a system in place where more people with their health issues get addressed first, and the pressure on the specialists will be lowered and perhaps will have better delivery. Now, till we get to that ideal place, how do you protect all doctors, whether they are not specialized, they don't have a super specialty, they're just MBBS, or they're specialist, and how do you protect them? Do you think that that ordinance that the government has come up with is enough? Because, you can only scare people with the fear of the law as much, right? I mean, the law is there, but you got to implement it. And first, before you implement it, there has to be a fear for the law. In our country, it doesn't seem like there's a fear for the law. So how effective is an ordinance going to be? To your mind, Dr. Yonda, what do you think?
Thank you very much. Coming back to the same main issue of the hazards to the doctors, I fully agree with Professor Desai and Professor Kumar on what they said. And by no way I would say that our government has done too badly. Our government has done reasonable, not too good, not too bad. But what happens is, I will come to first this protection of doctors issue, and then I'll go back to, if you permit me, for 2 more minutes on the broader aspects.
Yes.
So basically, for any problem, there should be some short-term, long-term, and immediate action.
Okay.
The immediate action government has done by passing the ordinance, no doubt about that. But all of you know the ordinance lasts for 6 months. It has to be passed in Parliament, otherwise it has got no value.
Yes.
And I must tell you, even today after ordinance, there have been instances of violence against doctors, not one, not two, more. There are even difficulties in, I do not know what's the reason why the doctors are not filing cases against those, but there are people are getting away. So it should not be a ordinance just for this crisis time of COVID for 6 months or 1 year. It should be a long-term solution.
A law.
A law, yes. The second thing is we have to have some short-term plans. But I must tell you that, again, it goes back to our priorities of healthcare. Why people are unhappy with us? Because our healthcare delivery is suboptimal. Why is it so? Because we do not have enough primary care doctors, we do not have enough family physicians, we do not have trained general practitioners, not self-styled general practitioners. That makes no sense. The MBBS doesn't become a GP. It is 5-year training. So because of this, these have to be strengthened. If India had that plan, the 1918 pandemic of Spanish flu killed almost, how many crores of Indians were killed?
Millions.
It was up to 2 crore Indians were killed. And that time the undivided India's population was less than 30 crores. So there should have been a pandemic plan in place. Australia, before WHO declared a pandemic, started their pandemic plan. Many other countries have done that.
Yes,
we
even
never
South
had a
Korea
pandemic.
did. Yes,
we never had a pandemic plan in place. So that is another thing we should have had, and we should have it now. It's not the fault of the government. It is the fault of 100 years in the past. So we should have, like now government has got disaster management plan. A similar way, there should have been a pandemic plan. So there has to be some short-term, long-term. Long-term plans are important. Certainly, the pandemic will last for some time, but it will become a low grade after 6 months or 1 year maximum. By 6 months time, certainly it will die out to a very minimal level. That's what the prediction we're giving. But what we have to, as you said, it is not just the COVID. COVID will die out one day, but there are so many.
Will come up.
Absolutely, and it's already coming up, and many more normally existing diseases. Our healthcare delivery system has to be geared towards that. And as Dr. Kumar said very rightly, communications. I was trying to say, maybe you interrupted me, so I couldn't say, is that before the medical students start seeing patients, there has to be some core strength areas. The core strength areas should include sociology of health-related and cultural beliefs of people, medical ethics, the knowledge of traditional medicine, what is the people's belief in that, the economics of health, the public health, epidemiology, the critical appraisal of scientific publication. Today, 99% of publications are trash. They are just for career enhancement. They don't really make sense. So there is a way of studying, it's called critical appraisal. And the medical students, before they start seeing patients, they should know what to read and what to throw as a junk. 99% junk, I must tell you. The other thing is the basic communication skills, scientific communication, as well as the day-to-day communication with the patients, the doctor-patient relationship, the knowledge of dietetics. No doctor knows about diet at all. Nobody knows. People ask always, what should I eat? What should I not eat? I do not know. I have to read and I have to tell them whatever scientifically I can say. They should have exposure to acute care, primary care, as well as the people's beliefs on the traditional systems, legal aspects of medicine, bedside manners. Most doctors have very poor bedside manners. In front of patients, they discuss, you have cancer, you have this, you have this. Patient is frightened to a mouse because he may be talking about some other patient. The doctors are talking a whole lot of things in bedside rounds. That is not warranted. And this is not taught in our MBBS curriculum anywhere. The other thing is what shall I say, the bedside, what shall I say, uh, and also the students should not be pressured into make a diagnosis. They should be first learn how to address the problem. I always tell my students that it doesn't matter you call it rheumatoid arthritis or a psoriatic arthritis. It makes no difference. You call it inflammatory polyarthritis. If you understand the basic principles of the pathology and the treatment approach, you will be able to treat it. So a problem-based learning has to be taught. And patient should first of all learn to be holistic as a social teacher. Doctor is first of all a teacher for the patient. The word doctor came from the word dossier in Latin, means to teach. So what I'm trying to say that 1 year they should spend in developing these skills, from ethics, from communication, to all social aspect. Even we should learn why people go after alternative systems of medicines and swamis and babas. People should learn. These are people's beliefs and faiths. And unless we understand them, we cannot respond to the patient very well. So this is the core area. And then I must tell you that the government should make thousands, not one or two, thousands of family physicians, primary healthcare physicians, general practitioners with appropriate training who can cope with our system. We don't have to make too many cardiologists or too many gastroenterologists anymore. We have enough of them. And I like the one, of course, we now have reasonable numbers, so we can justify the saying Dr. Desai said about the hygiene hypothesis. Yes, it's true that we live dirty, we are protected for even for rheumatic diseases. We say we get less rheumatoid arthritis because we are infected with. But of course, we cannot be complacent with that. There are diseases which kills. The hospital acquired infections kill patients, who would not have otherwise died. People at 60 years old who are diabetic or hypertensive, he can live up to 90 years with medication. He should not die of COVID. So there are many preventive things we can do. Hygiene is really very important still. I'm not saying that the hygiene in that sense. So what I'm trying to say that overall, we should have very good primary care oriented family medicine and general practice at the topmost of the base of the pyramid. The base of the pyramid should be family medicine, GP, and primary care doctors, and this has to be done properly. Secondly, what the government has done is government had economists, government had epidemiologists, government had virologists, government had cardiologists, respiratory doctors to make a policy. But what happened is, to make a unified policy, it does not mean you satisfied everybody at 20%. The 5 experts give 20% of economy, 20% of virology, 20% of epidemiology. That's not correct. What they should have done, they should have taken a bold step. We could see the government started off very well. I became an admirer of PM Modi when he announced lockdown 1 and 2, because certainly it has affected and brought down our level of infectivity. But under the pressure of various people, all of you know that government has relaxed from lockdown 3 onwards. And if you didn't have this, you would have had much better scenario today. Economy can come back faster if the lives are saved. Economy will go for 6 years if lives are affected. And I must tell you one thing, that we should have now a system in place, not a knee-jerk response to whatever happens. Every time Ahmedabad earthquake happened, and then we had the new plans to make houses which are protected against earthquake. We should have all the plans in place, and I'm sure the government is now under a lot of pressure. And I must tell you, the government has done a good job in spite of the limitations, better than many other governments. But we could have done better, and we should have a total revamp of our healthcare delivery system, have more public participation, train people as volunteers who can come forward for any disasters. And thank you very much.
Right.
That makes any sense.
Dr. Desai, you've been nodding. So I want to come to you. Dr. Danda says that we have done well. Dr. Desai, you're muted. Now, Dr. Danda has said that there are a few things that our healthcare administration has done well in response to the pandemic. but we should be prepared with a plan to look ahead and be ready for that. Now, to your mind, when it comes to doctors' physical safety, their mental stability, and the resilience, what can we learn from others? Some, people, how do we prepare for the future? We would have seen somebody gone through something and learn from them. So what can we learn so that our doctors, our healthcare professionals, they are safe, they are happy, and they're resilient?
One huge disclaimer. One huge disclaimer. I am politically non-aligned and non-affiliated. But look at Kerala, look at Rajasthan, forget Delhi. Okay, so there are, like you are saying, Anisha, what can we learn from the world? Sure, and I'll come to that in a minute. But one doesn't have to even go far away from home.
Anybody, sir, not just
right. But allow me. Why I was nodding repeatedly is that my lifetime passion has been, and my generation, and I guess reasonably failed, in getting across what both these colleagues said so eloquently and so well, both Dr. Sanjeev Kumar and Dr. Danda, about what I refer to as humanizing medical care or healthcare. See, the human face of medical care or of medical education has been such a gap. And allow me, Anisha, you might not know if I might take liberty, or you might know, but at least it was much before time, because it was much before my time. 75 years ago, Sanjeev Kumar साहब आपको याद होगा, definitely Dandari को भी याद होगा, Sir Joseph Bohr Committee report in 1946 spoke about two aspects: top-down approach, and top-down. Please imagine, I still get gooseflesh when I think of. Way back in the mid-40s, this one gentleman and the commission were able to think of what are the three apex institutions that you want. All India Institute of Medical Sciences, Biomedicine, Hygiene and Public Health, Calcutta, and Mental Health in Bangalore, AIMH, which has now become NIMHANS. So that was the top-down approach. But even that's a bit aside. Bottom-up approach had only two things: communitization, and that's my word, but he said community orientation for both medical education and for healthcare delivery system. What both of you are saying so much on target. Somehow again, I mean, I get distressed, but I don't allow myself to be distressed too much so that it doesn't affect my performance and outlook. The progress has been very, 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 very slow. It's now happening. The behavioral sciences in medical education that Dr. Danda was referring to, the human face, the interpersonal skills, soft skills that Dr. Sanjeev Kumar referred to. I wouldn't say it has not happened, but it's happening too slowly still. And I'm at one level very impatient, especially for societal good. Like I said, I try to keep convince myself and say, okay, maybe a society or a nation like ours requires and operates at a different pace. Maybe we are not Switzerland or the Nordic countries or New Zealand or even the US of A, with all its pluses and minuses. So that was one take on it. The other thought that I had as I was listening to both these colleagues was, we as human race learned a lot from the HIV pandemic. This same aspect of the importance of social and behavioral aspects got at least somewhat generalized from HIV and AIDS to the rest of medicine and healthcare. To some extent, the fact that there needs to be some amount of behavioral science orientation, yet my own sense, and I've been involved in NACO about all this work quite a bit, the attention that NACO or the governments or we as society paid to the HIV counselors was pathetic. In the National AIDS Control Program, the HIV counselors were up to 2009 or 10 being paid 6,000 or 7,000 rupees per month. And I should train them. Even now, the HIV counselors are paid about 13 or 14 or 15,000 per month. My unskilled houseman or daily wager in the hospital under the government of Delhi gets 14,000 a month. A master's qualified psychology or social work counselor for the HIV program gets about the same amount. So what I started with from the car about health in general, about the soft aspects that both these colleagues are saying so totally correctly, about soft skills and the human aspect, the behavioral aspects, all of human race and Indian society particularly has had this huge dualism. We will pay lip service, but when it comes to action, we cannot take bold steps. Having said that, the other difference, if I might put on the table for all of us to consider, is that see, HIV pandemic was all said and done. Now, when you look back, operating at a moderate pace. That time it seemed like it was growing like a tsunami. Now we know through this epidemic what a tsunami of epidemic is. You know, last 3 months have taught us how a highly infectious disease can actually scare the entire human race. So now when you look back, HIV pandemic was at a moderate pace. And yet, all of health systems benefited somewhat in terms of funding, in terms of emphasis, in terms of behavioral science orientation, recognizing the value of privacy and confidentiality stuff, you know. Ethical issues came to medicine much more to the forefront only after HIV pandemic. So are there lessons that we are beginning to be willing to begin to crystallize that human race can learn from this epidemic, that healthcare delivery system can learn, that we in medical education or medical service delivery can learn and should learn? Like I said from the car, it's a transformative experience. Right? The world is never going to be the same again. But for us, in small think groups like this, larger, what are the lessons that we can crystallize? As you've all been saying, surely safety of the provider at least at par with safety of the consumer, if not a notch higher. The robustness of the healthcare delivery system, the service conditions being fair to the healthcare providers. Most importantly, the hygiene and cleanliness. Like I said earlier, this is a double-edged sword. For psychological resilience, I am very willing to argue that the East is better than the West. Like I keep saying, the collectivism, please be with me, the collectivistic society that India and South Asia are fare much better in disasters than the Western world ever does. Can I argue the same unidirectionally for hygiene and cleanliness? No, I can't. So our society will have to learn to say we retain the old values and patterns, but maybe we learn to go to Ethiopia at Habitat, and we learn to have the Golgappas in a hygienic manner, not from the street side with that fellow dipping his hand in the. I do believe that for psychiatry and mental health, for public health, for clinical medicine, or all humanity, there are lessons to learn. And allow me to get what might sound philosophical, if not metaphysical. For individuals or human race, micro or meso or macro level, it's fairly easy to crystallize lessons after the experience is over. It's not too difficult a task, no big deal. The trick, it seems to me, is in crystallizing lessons to be learned when you're going through the experience.
Like now.
Can we right now, as human race or as a nation, begin to crystallize what lessons do we need to learn? How do we implement them? Not wait for the COVID era to end. And to that extent, I really think, allow me to repeat, I think we have done all right. I think we have done pretty well.
All right,
see, doomsday sayers will be plenty, you know. Hannah.
Dr. Kumar has a few words to say in closing. What would you like to say, Dr. Kumar?
Thanks, Anisha, and good to hear Dr. Desai as well. Let me take you back to tsunami. When it happened in 2004, I was posted in Geneva. Geneva is the relief capital of the world, and India stood out as a country which managed it very well.
On its own.
On its own. And they told everyone else, hold on, we have system in place, we will be able to do well. And thanks to the disaster management system which was put in place, and then we formally had a National Disaster Management Act, we have been able to address COVID-19 pandemic much better. And one of the reasons is we have this act, and in that act, to clarify what Dr. Danda said, we have a provision of dealing with outbreaks, and I train people in disaster management in the health field. So that's one thing we came to our help. And then looking at the silver lining, yes, there has been gaps. The cracks which were in the health system have become widened. We have seen those cracks, and no person less than a minister is now aware of the cracks we have in the health system. Hopefully, that will bring health and investment in health to a higher level. Many other aspects, the silver lining. My wife is a professor in a university. I see her every day taking classes online for the students sitting in remote parts of the country, remote areas in Bihar and other parts of the country, through their mobile phone, those who have access to internet through their so that's one thing which was in the coming but has been
now here.
I must have participated in at least 10 webinars, some for teaching doctors and some for general public like this one, and I have not stepped out of home. I'm in that risk age group, hypertensive and 66 years of age. So there are many things which have happened which we could not imagine can happen before the outbreak of COVID. It is private sector. We know 80% of hospital care in urban areas provided by private sector, 60 to 70% in rural areas. But they were always on the margin. And if you recall, they were on the margin for a few months after the COVID-19 outbreak took place. It was only testing in government labs, government hospitals when it was expanded, and then maybe later on when they realized they couldn't manage. So another aspect is that government can no longer close its eyes to private sector, and we have to mainstream private sector. It should be seamlessly passing on patients or people who need health care from public sector to private sector or vice versa. So these are some of the positive aspects I see which we can learn from this pandemic, and I am sure we have done well in the past. When you look at mortality indicators, life expectancy, yes, we haven't done as well as we should have done, but I was speaking somewhere and I said 2.2 million children in a year are dying, are prevented from dying. So restlessness to current situation, and then why can't we do better? That's what is driving us into making some of those comments which may sound negative on what we have not been able to do. Thank you.
Right.
Sorry.
Dr. Desai, very quickly, we're now running out of time. Very
Dr.
quickly.
Dr. Sanjeev Kumar has actually prompted me much more. Thank you, sir. Especially about tsunami. Allow me to share quickly. In my lifetime till now, I have been to perhaps 25 or 30 bilateral Indo-US meetings. Forget the multilateral. The one meeting that I'll never forget was in Agra about disaster and emergency preparedness in 2005. Soon after tsunami and the what was that? One of those disasters in US. Yeah. And believe you me, sir, the entire 2.5 days, we were on the front foot. And the US team was on the back foot. Two major things. One, our own community and societal resources are humongously strong. And at least in terms of emergency and disaster preparedness, whatever we may say about our healthcare system and the preparedness, even civil administration, like you said, was very good. So we need to, and NDMA has actually crystallized that well. The other thing occurs to me, and I must share this, we're having a wonderful chat. It bothers me immensely when professionals or organizations or magazines go to town saying India is the diabetes capital of the world. India is the most depressed country. Bull. Pure bull. Like I keep arguing, because we are second largest in population, obviously the number of people with diabetes mellitus or number of people with depression is the largest or the second largest. Elementary, my dear Watson, I would want to tell them, you can't go by absolute numbers. You need to go by
percentages,
proportions. No,
proportions.
Please understand what happens, especially in current era. And I keep saying this on all platforms. If I'm vulnerable to depression, biologically or psychologically or socially, and then I read the lead magazine article saying India is the most depressed country, what do you think happens to me? I only become more depressed.
I'm done for. That's what I feel.
You can't let that happen as scientists or even as responsible media professionals. Factually incorrect, sensationalizing stories is a huge disservice that also we need to do something about.
It undermines everyone's effort to, get it to. Thank you so much, Dr. Danda, Professor Kumar, Dr. Desai. Thank you so much for sharing with us your thoughts on how we can keep our medical professionals safe, motivated, and of course, how our healthcare delivery systems can also come up with what we have right now, the infrastructure that we have right now.